A leader is best when people barely know he exists, not so good when people obey and acclaim him, worse when they despise him. But of a good leader who talks little when his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, we did it ourselves.
Welcome to the Get Invested podcast, where we share great conversations with experts from all walks of life to uncover their secret know-how and where they invest their time, their skills and their money, and the benefits that this has created. You see, the truth is that everyone invests. Every minute of every day, we're investing our time, our skills, our energy and our money in something. Some of us are investing consciously, some unconsciously, sometimes for good, sometimes for bad, and sometimes for no impact. Get Invested will help you to start living by design, not by default. I'm going to help you to make it happen, not let it happen. You'll hear the top tips on how you can live with conscious intent so that you can live more, work less, and leave a living legacy by investing now. Listen to the show to discover the top tips on how to get started, make the most of your investment journey, and ultimately to be living your dream, not someone else's. More episodes can be found on iTunes or at bushymartin.com.au/get invested. Thanks for listening, and now let's get invested.
Hi Freedom Fighters. Many of you know that I've always been fascinated and intrigued by sustainable success. That is, success that's delivered consistently over the long term. And I'm talking 10 to 20 years plus here. Now, what I've found in every instance is that it never relies on one person. It's always involving a team, and it's always supported by great leadership. This means that if you're going to achieve any form of sustainable success in your life, then great leadership skills are absolutely fundamental. So what is the essence of great leadership? What separates great leaders from lesser leaders? And how can I become a great leader? Not surprisingly, success leaves signs and signatures, and there is no better sustainable success signature than today's guest, Brian Cunningham. Check this out for leadership pedigree. Brian has over 20 years of experience as a chief executive in both the private and public sectors, and is widely recognised for leading and developing successful organisations through significant change across a variety of sectors that include sport, education, training and economic development. From his debut with the State League Port Adelaide Magpies in their underage teams in the late 1960s, Bucky, as he's affectionately known, has played an integral role with the Port Adelaide Football Club over a period spanning 35 years. Now, during his playing career, he amassed 428 goals from a total of 256 league games for Port after he debuted there in 1971. He was renowned for being impeccably fair, highly skilled, and one of the most naturally two-sided players of his era. And he'll talk about the reality of that in our discussion. He also kicked 4 goals and was Port's best player in the drought-breaking 1977 grand final win against Glenelg, and he captained the Magpies to 3 consecutive premierships between 1979 and 1981. He also represented South Australia 6 times before retiring from the game in 1983. So, with sports at the heart of Brian's ethos, he's best known for his key leadership role in the successful tender for an Australian Football League club franchise licence in 1994 and the development of the state-based sporting club, the Port Power, to a highly successful National Football League entity in the period from 1996 right through to 2004, where he crowned his career with Port Power's first premiership in his last year at the helm. He then switched into the corporate arena, where Brian led strategic reviews and change management programs in the structural reform of 2 very large South Australian government departments. Firstly, as CEO of TAFE for 4 years in the mid-2000s, where he led the state's training system of over 80,000 students, producing government-funded student outcomes in 2008 that ranked first in Australia in all key categories, which included employment success of graduates, student satisfaction, and student transition to higher qualifications. He then spent 3 years overseeing the state's efforts in key economic development activities to generate increased trade, investment and jobs as Chief Exec of the Department of Trade and Economic Development. Brian then moved out of the public sector in mid-2010 and since then he's taken up private sector board director roles. He's also formed his own consultancy company. Brian's a fellow of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and he holds a Bachelor of Science and Diploma in Education as teaching was his initial career move. He's performed the role as chairman of various national and state government committees in spheres as widespread as training, education and also economic development. He currently sits as a director on 6 diverse boards and acts as chairman of 5 of these. Not surprisingly, Brian's also an accredited professional in emotional intelligence or EQ, as well as leadership. Now, how's that for an impressive lifetime of leadership CV? So, during our wide-ranging discussion on success and leadership, you'll learn how teams make a difference, the importance of 10,000 hours, the role of motivation, where positive psychology fits in, and the benefits of focusing on strength building, plus the advantages of building a good war chest, and a whole lot more. So please join me in enjoying this fascinating chat with another of my humble heroes, Brian Cunningham. Hi Freedom Fighters. Today I've got the great pleasure of enjoying a chat with another one of my humble heroes. He's a recognised and highly accomplished leader, and he does that in everything that he turns his hands to. He's someone I've had the pleasure of learning about emotional intelligence with a few years back. So welcome aboard to Get Invested, Brian Cunningham.
G'day, Bushy. How are you?
Really good, mate. I'm really humbled to have the opportunity to spend some time with you today, mate, and share some of your learnings. Mate, for those who, because you're very famous locally here in good old South Australia and most of Australia, in fact, but for those who don't know who you are, can you give us a bit of a rundown on who you are and what you're doing, mate?
Where I am now is I'm a consultant now. I have a half a dozen boards and I chair 5 of those. And I do some leadership consulting, a lot of executive coaching because I'm at the age now where I guess I've had a lot of experience and so people come to me and I really enjoy that one-on-one interaction. So I work out of the city in Adelaide and I'm at the stage of my career where, you know, it's a great life and probably it's a culmination of many years of doing a whole range of different things. So that's what I'm currently doing. My background, if you want me to go through where I started as a humble school teacher back in my early days through university, and then I stayed in teaching until I was about 35. I did play Australian rules football. I played for my club, Port Adelaide, captained them, and we had a lot of success in our time. I think I had 4 premierships in that time, played a lot of games, and ultimately came back to the club in another career because I left teaching looking for something that would stretch me a bit more. I couldn't see myself being a headmaster in a school for 30 years. That was where I was placed at the time when I was in mid-30s. And so, you know, ultimately ended up running my old football club, Port Adelaide, back in 1992, worked with a board, got us into the AFL competition, spent a lot of time there, retired from AFL football as an administrator with a premiership in 2004, and then I went into government and spent 5 years running some large government departments. Trade and economic development was my last one. Previous to that was further education, employment, science, technology, the TAFE system, etc. So they were pretty big government departments, which stretched me a lot. And out of that, into this consulting role here in Adelaide. So probably that's a brief snapshot of my career from early days, being a kid loving footy, doing a bit of teaching, and then working my way to the role I am today.
Mate, you covered an enormous amount of ground there, and very humbly so also, as is always your fashion, Brian. But, mate, what I'm keen to do is sort of dig into a little bit of your background, if I may, because one of the things that always interests me is the path to success. And you've had a lot of it, and we'll talk more about that as we go. But if we go right back to the early part of your journey, I'm just sort of interested to see how your background, family-wise and otherwise, influenced your entry into elite sport initially, mate. What did you take from that was probably instructive in terms of helping you to make that initial splash into the State Football League?
Oh, look, I guess we were. I was born at Semaphore, raised in that Port Adelaide area. We're a very working class family. My dad was a fibrous plasterer, and he knew the value of trade. Having a trade and working hard. And my mum raised a family as she did, but then she had a bit of an entrepreneurial streak in her, and ran a really successful small catering business for a while. So I had really good leaders in that respect in terms of my parents. And look, I live locally at Port Adelaide, and my background was I love footy. I really enjoyed school. I went to the local Lefevre Boys Technical High School before I went to Woodville High School. So I wasn't I certainly wasn't a private school student or anything. We couldn't afford that.
Yeah.
And we probably lived a pretty normal, humble life, but one of the things my parents wanted me to do was to be better than they were in terms of career. So they worked really hard for me to go to university, and out of that, teaching career and a whole lot of other things evolved.
Yeah. So I guess the interesting challenge and parallel there is that there's an academic focus, and I a little bit younger than yourself, Brian, but not much, and very similar in terms of my parents being country people, and their view was that to improve education was a really important part of it. So going to uni was almost just a given at my age, but the sport often can get in the road of that. So how did you manage to juggle those two? Because I would have thought that even back in the heady days when you were playing with Port Adelaide, there would have been a lot of pressure to dedicate most of your time to the playing field and training and whatnot. So how did you manage to juggle those two?
Yeah, it was and when I reflect back on that time, it was when you're working class, and the message was always you don't get anywhere in life without working hard.
Yeah.
So when you're juggling it was an SANFL, South Australian National Footy League career, but it was probably 30 hours a week that we trained and played, because most of the weekends were taken up with playing and training Saturday, and then we're training on Sunday, and we'd train Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and then spend a lot of time preparing. So it was a sort of a semi-professional career. They paid us, which was terrific. Yeah. And I balanced that with teaching, which was a full-time career. And then in the later stages of my footy career, when I was captain and we were doing quite well, I also had a bit of a media career with that as well, calling football, commentating, and being on football shows, etc. So basically, in those days, it was like 3 jobs, and we just went from one to another because we were working class and we worked hard.
Was it always in the back of your mind that your football career probably had a shelf life, and therefore you needed something after that would sustain you beyond it? Was that part of the thinking, Brian? Or?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, I didn't think of that when I was 15 or 16 at school. I really enjoyed. I was a science base. I really enjoyed that whole academic sort of stuff. So for me, education was fun. But yeah, in the back of my mind, footy was the most fun for me because it was my passion at the time. Yeah. I always knew that by the age of 30, 31 that I'd be out of a footy career. It's like AFL footballers now. they need to prepare for their career beyond footy, because there's a lot of years beyond 30 that you have got to work and enjoy life. And while footy is a real adrenaline rush, you've got to look beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. Mate, let's talk about the football side a bit of it now, because it has parallels to the world outside that. And I guess one of the things that's always I'd admired about you is that, I love to see relatively shorter players do very well. And you're about, 5'10" or thereabouts, I think.
Yeah,
right in saying?
8.5, yeah, not overly, not a little bit vertically challenged, you might say. Yeah.
but what I love about seeing your career during those days was just the determination and the quiet persistence that you appeared to apply to everything that you did. And what I'm interested to dig into was you obviously gravitated towards becoming captain of the club, and very successfully did so with, was it 3 or 4 premierships around that time, mate?
Yeah, 4 premierships and 3 in a row, which was quite a
incredible.
Really, and yeah, it was great. Part of a team, and that whole team thing's been part of my whole life. Is that I'm reasonably good at certain things, not good at others, but when you get good teams around you and good people who fill the gaps where you're not, it does make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what I'm keen to dig into, mate, the leadership side of that equation in sort of rising to the top of the club and taking on that mantle of responsibility, was that something that you openly pursued, or was that something that others saw in you and encouraged you to? Can you just talk us through a little bit of that, please, mate?
No, they didn't. I was a player, and I guess at that stage, without being overly, without saying how good I was probably an elite player on the side, and I performed really well. No one approached me about a leadership role as captain until the sort of mid-20s, and one of our we had a change in leadership at that time, and they the club then asked me would I be vice captain, and then once you're vice captain, then you step up to a leadership role. It's like it's one out, one back, and then Russell Ebert, who was a great captain of the club, went to North Melbourne, left a vacancy for captain, and then they asked me to do that, which was really great. It was terrific. And so I did that for 4 years and really enjoyed it. So a bit of no one ever said to me, we're grooming you for a position, but I always knew that if I worked hard, that good things would come. So that happened.
Yeah, sort of digging into that a little bit. A lot of people used to talk about how you were appeared to be such a natural on both your left foot and your right foot, and you've mentioned a couple of times already that the work ethic, just wearing it down, was your way of developing skill. Was that part of your achieving that, or were just a natural on both feet?
No, in those days of playing football, it was there weren't too many people who kicked both sides of their feet. I had an aspiration to do that. I looked at players like John Carr was my hero, and he played for Port Adelaide left footer. I had an aspiration to kick left foot as well as right. I was a natural right footer, but it's that old story. I think you talk about 10,000 hours. You just keep practicing, and you end up you do enough of that stuff. You become an expert in it. It's like that whole story about you can become a scratch golfer if you spend 10,000 hours practicing and do it right. And footy for me was a bit that way. It was like, okay, if you want to be really, really good, then maybe you better spend a bit of time at it. So I did, lots of time.
Yeah. That's that's one of the myths I think that a lot of people misread, is that they don't understand or appreciate how much work you've put into developing those skills. And we look at a lot of elite sportsmen because it's an easy one to measure, I guess. And there are, I've always heard, and you're probably an advocate of this as well, that there's 3 sides to a performance triangle. There's the skills component, but then there's the structure and the mindset that needs to support all of that. Do you think your focus on all three sides of that performance triangle resulted in both your on-field success but also contributed to you gravitating into those sort of leadership positions, mate?
Yeah, it did. And I think that first role of being captain of Port Adelaide in my mid-20s set me up for, this made me think this leadership thing I quite like this, and we're having some success and all of that. So how do you do that? But, go back to your pillars or your sides of your triangle. Yeah, there's no question that you need all of those strong to do that work. And it wasn't a structure that I had in my mind at the time. It was just, it did basically come down to, well, what do you want to achieve and where do you want to go and how do you get there? And for me, it was always a bit of work. Yeah.
No, fantastic. Now, just let's talk about that phase of your leadership career, because there's some really good grounding that you can pick up in captaining a sports team. What was the essence of your leadership style at that stage, mate? Can you sort of think back to what was your approach to getting the most out of the rest of your team, but also working with the coaching fraternity and the club administration at the time?
Yeah, I guess I was reasonably adept. I was smart enough to be able to see how footy was played at those days. Didn't have a lot of role in strategy, a lot of leading by example stuff. I quite liked that sort of approach. The hard work, the skills, all of that sort of stuff that helped me. And because I was university trained, I think through education, one of the things that I always say is that my teaching career taught me enormous amounts around people and how you deal with people and particularly how you communicate with people. So, that was a bonus for me. So all of those things transpired to work in my favour, as it were, in terms of working out leadership in a sports club, and then after that leadership in a whole range of other things.
Let's talk about perhaps some of those early mentors then, that people who you either looked up to from a leadership perspective or those that saw the leadership potential in you and assisted you. Can you sort of talk through who they were and why they were so influential in your career journey at that point?
Yeah, well, I talked about my parents. I've done that. John Carr was my coach, and I looked up to him an awful lot as a player, and in those days, and we've had a long journey. He was a great motivator. Foss Williams was my first coach, and people may or may not remember Foss Williams, but he was one of the great coaches in South Australian football at the time, and hard, and he taught me so much about the craft of being an on-baller. They called it a rover at that time, but being an on-baller and how you do all of that stuff. So there were great mentors in that. But I think what I find, Bushy, is you come across people in all walks of life, in all ways. Everyone has a story to tell, and there's always something about people that, because I'm a bit of a people watcher, that you go, I reckon there's something I can learn about that person, how they did that. And what can you take out of that? So I am an avid watcher of people, listen to people, take a bit out of everyone. But there are a couple of names in football in those days that people I really admired and looked up to and had a big impact on me.
Was there anything specific about those that stood out for you, that are qualities you think that you've taken on board in your ongoing leadership career, mate?
I think with let's say take Foss Williams for example, that's sort of like the hardness and the toughness that you need. I mean, we all need to be resilient, but how you work through all of the life's not perfect, and things do happen, and people get belted around a bit, and how you keep coming back all the time, and the persistence and I guess the resilience, all of that stuff. From Foss, and from John was more about how you motivate people, I think. And he was a great motivator of people. Probably not in he was a skillful player in his own right. Probably not as didn't pass the skills on as much as the way that you get people to go with you. Like that's the nature of life, isn't it? This particular, the nature of leadership is, you can't be a leader without having some people follow, and and how do you get them to follow? And some people are very, very good at that. John was.
Yeah, I'd love to drill into that, mate, because the ability to motivate is a rarity. But if you were to try to define the essence of how he managed to motivate you and inspire others, what was his approach, mate? How did he get the best out of you and the rest?
I think it was always there's a lot to be said about positive psychology. I learned a lot out of that over the journey. The Martin Seligman stuff about telling people that they're good at stuff, and funny about that, the more you tell them how good they are, the better they get. And this whole focus on strength building. John Cale wasn't someone who focused necessarily on weaknesses. He focused on the people's strengths, and that for me has always been a big learning, and I've carried right through today that this whole strength building space is massive. Motivating people are motivated by different things. Understanding, we're all amateur psychologists, Bushy, and understanding what motivates people. Is it achievement, or is it working with people? Is it power? Is it those sorts of things? Yep, or a bit of each of those. But understanding, when you deal with people, what their prime source of motivation is, or how they are best motivated, is a really interesting thing.
Yeah, so again, sort of in line with your ability to observe people, recognising where they're at, and then taking a situational approach to what's going to work best for that individual, rather than taking a blanket approach. Is that am I right in summarising it that way?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, that's where, and I do a lot of coaching nowadays. You understand people, understand them well, know what makes them tick. The more you understand someone, the better you can work with them to make them better.
Yeah, no, awesome summary there, mate. Now, you actually enjoyed some sensational success, as you've already mentioned, with the premierships under your banner while you were captain of the side. But the end of your playing career was probably a little bit disappointing, as I understand it, given financially driven decisions by the club. Can you talk us through a little bit about that and how that left you feeling, and what you took away from that exercise at the close of your career, mate?
Oh, look, I think it was just one of those things that happened at the time. The club, we'd won 3 premierships in 4 years, and then the club was obviously wasn't managed well financially, because they came to the players beginning of 1984 season, the end of 83 season, and they basically said, well, we're cutting everyone's contract in halves, every player, whether you're contracted or not. And then so I was being the captain or vice captain at that time, because Russell had come back. I just said, look, that's unfair. And so ultimately, after a bit of a battle with the powers that be there, they decided that they would make sure that everyone's contract was fulfilled, except for those players who were going into new contracts. And there were 4 players out of contract, 4 high-profile players, myself being one of them.
Yep.
And they said, "Oh no, we'll make the savings out of you guys. So you 4 players will cut all of your contracts in halves." And I said, look, that's just really poor form. And so I decided I'd retire. Now, at the end of the day, the club was in financial strife. At the end of the day, my retirement resulted in those other 3 players all getting their full contracts. And I was disappointed in the club at the time, but it's my club, so it's never been. I've never gone to another club and never wanted to, and so we reconciled that after a couple of years. I still think that it was poor form, but that was a long time ago, and we've done a lot of water under the bridge since then. And I've worked with the club over that period of time, mending that. That was a tiny mishap in a really great time with the club over 50 odd years. So.
Well, it's probably testimony to your forgiveness, Brian, and that loyalty that I hear coming through. Again, really big qualities of of successful leaders, and because a lot of people would have spat the chewy at that point in time and never returned, Brian. So having the ability to step back and look at that and say, well, okay, this is just a speed bump on the road to what's been an awesome relationship says a lot about you more than the club, to be honest. But
oh no, the club's been great to me over the course of the journey, and that was like a time, and when they made a poor decision. So everyone makes poor decisions, but I think they learned a bit out of it, and so I stuck with my principles, and that was it. So look, it wasn't majorly disappointing. I was at the end of my career pushing. Goodness me, I might have had 2 more seasons left at best, and I'd already played 260 odd games. So that was I was okay. I was fine.
Mate, something that's always intrigued me, Brian, because I see this in a lot of elite sports people, and I guess it's because you reach the pinnacle and then there's nowhere to go after that. But a lot of them, and I'm assuming you're probably the same, once you retire, that is retire, you never pick up a skin again, rather than kicking around the backyard with the kids. Why is that, mate? Because I'm one of these people. I'm nearly played 800 games of field hockey, and they're going to have to shoot me to stop me. And I'm still out there, and not playing anywhere near the level I was, obviously. But the joy of the game, I find very difficult to give up. Can you talk me through your thinking around that? Because I've had this conversation with a number of elite sports people who literally do retire at the peak, and I get that. You're walking out at the top of your game, but do you miss it? And sort of take me through some of the thinking around that, mate.
No, I don't miss it. I think I had a really good time. I started playing footy when I was probably 3 or 4, and started playing league footy when I was 17 and finished when I was 30, and I had a really neat career, and it was great, but I didn't want to play outside of that. I got a lot of invitations to do that, but no, footy was great for me. I still enjoy a kick with the grandkids and all of that. That's fine. Yeah. But no, I think there was other things too. It's like it's a time where you say, right, yeah, that's it. And I don't know how you feel about your hockey, but I love footy, but I don't need to or want to play anymore. And I did that when I was 30 and just didn't play anymore. Some guys will continue, and you're obviously doing what you do, but I thought, no, there's plenty of other challenges in the world, so I then started to concentrate on my teaching career and how I could improve that, and how I could rise through the ranks in that space. So that was my focus shifted away from footy into other areas. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, now just talking before we sort of move on to that ongoing leadership career, what was I'll call it falling off the cliff, but going from being a demigod as you were in football eyes within the state of South Australia to the spotlight's off. What was that transition like, mate? It must have been challenging for a period, or not?
It was made a bit easier because I went into the media and did commentating for Channel 9, I think at the time, and 5AA, and so I spent 3 or 4 years in those sorts of roles, which are reasonably profiled roles, and so I got a bit of a kick out of that, as it were. So I didn't have that, but I for me, like, it's fame is, it's what you make it. So you're not a famous player anymore, but go and do something else and make yourself well known in other spaces. It was like, what's the next challenge? Let's go and do something else.
Yeah, well, obviously went down that road, but then were lured back in to the club. And from the outside looking in, what you achieved with bringing Port Adelaide into the Australian Football League, which is effectively the National League, and what you achieved during that period, I take my hat off to you, mate. Can you talk us through that journey? Because there was a number of massive challenges that you took the club through, and that was one, just to get into the league to start with, and then to end your career as the CEO of Port Adelaide with a premiership under your hat, some pretty awesome achievements there, mate. Can you sort of take us through some of that journey? Because there would have been some major challenges in doing what you did. I'd love you to share with us, again, how your leadership skills assisted in, one, getting you into the competition, and then building the belief, the skills, the talent and the support to walk away with a premiership in the year that you decided to hang up your hat.
Yeah, by way of background, Bushy, the Port Adelaide tried to get in the AFL in 1990 and behind the backs of the SANFL, and was asked by the AFL to come in, but that didn't transpire. Brief story of that is that Port Adelaide were within we were hated by the South Australian football community, the SANFL, and all of the other SANFL clubs. Because we accepted an offer from the AFL at that time to push forward towards a national league. Yep. I joined in 1992 as chief executive. The club was pretty well on its knees, not from a performance point of view, but from a financial point of view. Our net assets are really poor, and we struggled to make a profit every year, and plus you got the rest of the football world hating you, and so there was a big divide there with Port Adelaide and the rest of South Australian football community. So we had to try and mend that. We were quite open and honest in the fact that we knew there was another AFL licence available. Out of the initial scrum, the Adelaide Crows were born in 1990. The SANFL made its own team, and they've been very successful, and they've won a couple of premierships, and so that got South Australian football into the National League, which it had to do. And what we would see from that point of view was that there was an opportunity for a second side to come in, and the future of football was in a National League. Yep. Because state leagues we were being drained of players all the time.
Yep.
Our best players were always going into the VFL or AFL competition. It was at that time, and it meant that South Australia would always be just a ground for developing young players, and ultimately never having its own representation in that league. So we started a 4-year journey, and we won. That 4-year journey was a great journey. It was there were lots of challenges. People hated our guts. We were disliked, but we were up front and said honestly, there is another licence. We would like to put our hand up for that. We know it'll be a tender, but we're preparing for that. So we prepared a plan for that. We did a lot of lobbying. We did a lot of we had to continue to be successful on the football field, so we continued to win premierships in the SANFL. I think we won 4 out of 5 premierships before we went into the AFL.
Yep.
So we tried to cover every base so that no one could say that you're not worthy of an AFL position. Yep, you didn't get the first one, the Crows got in, and the football world turned on you, and the AFL dropped you, and all of that sort of stuff. But there is a second licence when Fitzroy leave the competition, and they did, and that licence was awarded in end of 1994, and we came into the competition in 1997, and it was a great thrill to be part of all of that. Again, I go back to the work thing. It's a lot of work. We didn't get it by just sitting back and expecting it to happen. We worked really hard. Our tender was a 600-page tender, which the board and I wrote, and it was a really compelling piece of work that said, this is what we think we'll do in terms of crowds. These are the sorts of profits we think we'll have. This is what we'll add to the national competition. This is how we'll support the local competition with the dividends back, all of that stuff. So all of that was really well worked through. And as it turned out, when you reflect back and we had a look at our business plan for the first 3 years of that entry into the AFL competition, we by far and away exceeded what we won the tender with. We were the most profitable club in the AFL in our first 3 years of entry. We had an average profit of just over $1 million.
Nice.
Which was very good. And we were one kick away. Stuart Jew is great of ours, and now coaching, doing a great job in his footy career. He kicked out from fullback in the last game of the year versus Brisbane at the Gabba, and here's the best kick that we ever had. Yep. His kick was off the side of his boot, went to opposition player, they kicked a point, drew the game, and that was the only reason we weren't in the finals in the first year of our AFL journey. So, it was really good to be able to be competitive. Almost finalists in our first year. We eventually got to finals in year 3, and then we won a premiership after a few hiccups. At the end of year 8, I think it was. Yeah, so it was a good time.
Mate, the resilience that you must have either had or developed during that time must have been pretty amazing, because you're right, you were the pariah of of South Australia, and were left high and dry, and you're probably the catalyst really that pushed the creation of the Crows, because without your influence it probably would have taken a lot longer. So there's a sort of a secondary benefit of what you did during that time. But talk me through how you managed to swing things around, because that, being the pariah of the state, and then over a period of time turning that around, how did you cope with that personally, and how did you engender the resilience from the rest of the team to sort of weather the storm to then come out through the achievements that you had later on?
Yeah, I don't think it was just me, because I had a great board of people, and they all worked really, really hard. So we had probably about 8 or 10 board members who were not voluntary guys who spent so much time in helping to prepare us for AFL entry. So it wasn't just Brian Cunningham; it was lots and lots of other people. Sure. Yeah, look, you had to be resilient. The whole thing was all about, for me, it was about, you do what you're going to say you're going to do. Like we said, we were going to, be an entrant for the second licence. There would be a second licence from South Australia. We made all of the really strong business case around how good that would be for the state to have the rivalry that we have and that we have now and had at that time when we came in, and it's proven to be the case. And yeah, look, it may well have helped the Crows to aspire to, their first 2 premierships were in 97 and 98, our first 2 years that we came in, and good on them. And if they got a bit of an impetus from our entry, fantastic. But it was just it was being honest. It's the one thing they had us up as being dishonest because of 1990. So we just had to be totally honest about what we were doing, transparent. If you want to be with us, then get with us. We still had a massive supporter base here in South Australia who were definitely with us. We presented a case that our club would live forever in the AFL if it won that second licence, and that's probably the one thing that we're most proud of as a group, is that we've got a club, Port Adelaide, that I grew up barracking for and played for, that now plays in the National League and will play in the National League in 150 years' time, probably. Which is what we intended to do. That was putting us on the map that way.
Brilliant legacy, mate. Now, you touched on the profitability of the club, and it's something that again, looking in from the outside, the financial management of elite sporting teams has always been and will continue to be a major challenge. Would you mind sharing with us how you managed to take a club that was struggling financially right back from the days you exited your playing career, and then coming back in, which was probably part of the motivation for you to turn that around, how you did that, and what you think the essence of maintaining an elite sporting group as a profitable business effectively is, and some of the approaches that you've utilised to achieve that.
Yeah, I think when we started in 92, I think our net assets were probably below $200,000. That's for everything. That's the whole box and dice. By the time we went into the AFL over that 5-year journey to 1997, we built our net assets up to around what was it? Somewhere around 6 million, I think.
Wow.
3, 4, 5, 6 million. We built we built a good war chest, and that was through on-field performance and being smart about generating revenue, because it was all expenses were always there, but it was all about getting that revenue generation happening in sporting clubs, because sporting clubs notoriously, at all levels, even at AFL level sometimes, although they're pretty well serviced by the AFL now with television rights, they can, most sporting organisations struggle, and we were struggling. So, there's no, again, it was hard work. It was the board, it was myself and a whole range of staff, etc., who pushed really hard, and then you've got a playing group who played their hearts out to get us in the AFL and kept winning premiership after premiership. And when you keep selling memorabilia after premierships, you win a lot of money, and then the anticipation of us coming to the AFL gave us a great opportunity to bolster our coffers with people who were willing to support that. And then we had great people like Alan Scott, who came in and supported our foundation to help us to build the facilities down there, and as major sponsor and benefactors, and you wouldn't believe, Bushy, the benefactors that came and supported us from other clubs as well.
Right.
Who I think it's fair to say we had. I'll probably give one example, because I think it's fair to say that when we got into the AFL, it's a reasonably good story. I don't think you'll mind me telling it. But Rob Gerard rang, Clipsal, and he's a great benefactor for sport in South Australia and for business, and he ran a fantastic business, but a mad crows man, hated Port Adelaide. Then when we got into the AFL, we popped along Greg Bolton, who was president, and I went and saw him. Went to his offices, and he opened the door and he said, "G'day boys, and why are you here?" And we said, "Well, we've just won the licence for the AFL. This is in end of 94, 95, I think it was.
Yep.
Would you support us? We're a South Australian club now." He said, "I hate Port Adelaide, but you're gutsy enough to come and ask." And he did support us as a sponsor. And then when we built our facility, he was probably the second biggest contributor to our foundation behind Alan Scott. And for a guy who he was, he's a really, really great man, Rob. But, he didn't support us, didn't like our club, probably never forgave us for trying to get to the AFL. But he was very generous, and there were lots of people like the Rob Gerards of the world who were great for us.
Yeah, again, you're very humble, mate, but I think a lot of people, including myself, have immense respect for the integrity and the humility that you bring to everything you do, but also the fortitude and the vision, so that you're able to paint the picture of where something can go, and someone like Gerard would respect that. And because it's sort of a journey that he's been down. So, full marks to you for having the balls, really, to knock on his door and say, well, here we are. And then not people have that courage or strength to ignore that sort of perceived opposition and have the chat. So,
you never asked me to get, so...
No, it's a good call. Mate, let's move now. So you left at the pinnacle with a premiership under your hat, moved into the leadership arena in the public sector. Now, having managed a Commonwealth department myself many years ago in the transition from public sector to privatisation, it was probably the biggest and hardest, most challenging management and leadership environment I ever took on, and I attribute all of my grey hair to the few years I spent in that, because you're sort of jumping from an elite sport where everything is about performance and everything is about results to an arena where it's very politically driven, and those sort of performance parameters generally aren't applicable, because back in the day, if you had a job in the public sector, it was pretty much a job for life. So how did you make that transition, and what different approaches did you take to your leadership at that scale to then go on to achieve some pretty fantastic things with the positions you had in that regard?
Well, I knew that I would be challenged, and it's a bit like when I went to Port Adelaide from being a school teacher into a role as a CEO of a football club, and school teachers are notoriously not commercial, so I needed a lot of support. That's where I got the Greg Boltons and other people who are sitting around that board table who are great mentors for me, and I had to do a lot of work around finance, etc., to understand how good organisations manage their finance. So going into the public sector, going from a $30 million turnover at the football club maybe to to my first department, further education, and probably a bit like yours. But this is a $500 million department. That's what it runs on. That's not its revenue. That's what it delves out over the course of the journey, and in a year. And with 6,000 people, it was really a big challenge for me. Not just the politics. I think the politics ultimately was something that I don't think on reflection I did the politics side particularly well. But I love the organisations I work for, both of the large government departments. The people in there, some of the people were fantastic. I can't say all of them because I didn't know all the 6,000 people, but the ones that I worked with, particularly at the higher level in government, were really good. It was a hard challenge to try and go from a high performance organisation like a football club with a lot of success and people who were really who had specific roles and they were great at what they were doing, and the success was measurable every week and every year. To government where things weren't as measurable, but still some really good people in there. And as you probably found, governments can achieve a lot. Unfortunately, the politics probably gets in the way of a good business.
True, absolutely true. Yeah, interesting, mate. I'd say that, and you would have been involved at a time when there was a lot of change going on. So obviously, change management would have been a big part of your role. What do you think the essence of a successful change manager are, mate?
Oh, look, I think understand that change is inevitable and that you do need to change, and people, despite the fact that they might think they've got jobs for life, that they can do better and they can enjoy their work and they can produce a better outcome for the constituents, the people who are paying the taxes to keep you in that role. So yeah, look, like lots of stories out of government. Did we make a difference? I went into there thinking, this could be good because it was in education, which is my original background. Could I make a difference? No, other people will judge that. Probably not the big difference that I would have thought that I could have made, but massively good for me in terms of understanding government, understanding politics, learning. I still do a lot of consulting back into government coaching, so I keep a close eye on it. So it was very good for me in that regard.
Yeah, okay. Well, sort of bringing that sort of leadership discussion to a summary, mate. What do you think are the biggest mistakes that a lot of leaders make? And on the flip side of that, what do you think are the essential characteristics of good leaders from your perspective?
Yeah, I do a lot of leadership work, and I guess I said before at the beginning, just understanding yourself. I mean, a lot of leaders will look at, leadership has been lots of different styles of leadership over the journey, Bushy, that I've seen. A lot of people think it's all about direction and pushing people, and in some ways, bullying people into doing stuff. But look, there's a whole lot of different styles of leadership. It's understanding yourself and understanding how you best can work people, understanding others, and then working the style of leadership that will motivate them and get them to go with you. Because, as I said, if you're going to be a leader, you better have some followers, and if you can't get your people to go with you, then you're not leading them particularly well. So all of those experiences I've had over the journey have probably helped me to understand leadership a whole lot more. I've obviously studied it a lot. I've got a business partner who's an organisational psychologist who helps me a lot in terms of the analysis of people, so he can do that sort of deep work and find out more about personalities and talk about, give me an idea of what motivates people, what demotivates people, and how smart they are. And you and I both know that that time that we engaged on the emotional intelligence stuff, how important that is in the whole leadership journey. So all of those things is that leadership is you Google leadership and you'll get more responses from Google on leadership than you get from any other single topic. And what the secret of I think of understanding is trying to make it simple for people. I take a really simple approach, which I think I spoke to you about in terms of leadership. People either buy you or they don't. Simple buying behaviour. And why do they buy you? They buy you because you have certain skills and all of those sorts of things. But they also buy you for things like reputation and all of those sorts of things. They also buy you very much when you go and buy something. People are buying around Christmas time now. They buy on emotion, and that's where the emotional intelligence and values piece fits in. So I've got a really simple definition. People either buy you as a leader or they don't buy you as a leader, and a lot of it's to do with the way you treat them and the way you understand them, which is the EQ stuff.
Yeah, brilliant, mate. Brilliant. Awesome, mate. Changing track a little bit then, how does the support of your life partner, Annette, fit into your success, do you believe?
Well, it's critical. Absolutely. Annette and I have been, we're coming up 40 years, I reckon. So we've been married a long time and we do understand each other really well. She's massively different than me, and that's a great thing. Yep. Because we complement each other in so many ways. And she's a very different personality than me, and I think that's part of the success that we've had over the journey. So she's always been supportive, I think, of everything that I've done, changing careers. Like, it could have been nice to have stayed in education and been a headmaster for 30 years, and that would have been very safe and stable. But, I chose to do some other things, including footy and including government, and now what I'm doing. So, she's always been really supportive of that. And at the end of the day, that's definitely what you need. You need someone alongside of you who's prepared to go with you on that journey.
Yeah, awesome, mate. Now, again, just sort of leveraging off that, over my study of sustainable success over the last 30-odd years, I've found that a lot of Australians in particular invest in their work and their career and their business, and they tend to focus on income. But I've come to realise that those that achieve real freedom also invest in growth assets that effectively replace their active work income over time. Can I ask what sort of growth assets that you do or will invest in that will sustain your lifestyle long term, mate?
Yeah, without giving details away,
sure.
I mean, for our financial pillar, Annette and I, when we first started, was our house, and it still is. We're selling our house at Aldgate at the moment, our 4 acres, and we've been in it for 19 years, and it's been a beautiful property for us. But we're ready to downsize. But over the course of the journey, the houses that we've had have been probably our bedrock in terms of our financial success. Obviously, as you get older and into your 30s and 40s, I didn't know much about superannuation until my early 40s, but that's been a great vehicle for us over the journey. So that will help us in the next 20 or 30 years going forward. So they've been, and obviously, I invest. I've got a financial planner and an accountant, and we do invest in many things. But I think go back to your original point. You don't, and we're not wealthy people by any means, but we're very comfortable. But you don't build your wealth just by your income and what you save from your income. You've got to invest in the right places. But I have to say, I say to my kids, get into a house if you can. It's much more difficult nowadays than it was in our time. But that has been a great bedrock of our investment, our own home, capital gains tax, all of that stuff.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, mate. I appreciate you sharing that so openly. Mate, I want to switch now into what I call affectionately the bushfire round, or the ambush round, which plays on my nickname, obviously. And it's just a couple of questions that people really love to get sort of feedback on. So if I kick straight into that, what's your favourite quote and why?
Okay, that's an interesting one. I don't. I have a lot of personal quotes that people quote.
Let's use that because your personal ones are fine, mate.
I've got this one here is this one that I've got. It's a little. It's sitting in front of me because I've put it on a. You put your family up in photos around the room and stuff like that, and you put your degrees and all your other stuff around. But I got this quote. This quote I saw years and years and years ago, and you probably heard it before. But I do a lot of work on leadership. It relates to leadership, and it's by a guy called Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu was a 6th century Chinese philosopher, and I'll just read it to you. It's really short, but really sweet, I reckon. A leader is best when people barely know he exists, not so good when people obey and acclaim him, worse when they despise him. But of a good leader who talks little when his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, we did it ourselves. So it's a really, if anyone wants to look up, it's Lao Tzu, Laotzu, 6th century Chinese philosopher. And that's we talked a lot about leadership in this sort of brief chat that we've had.
Yep.
But that for me is really important. It's the whole thing about getting people to go with you and the way you go about it and the whole team thing. Like I could never have, I've been very lucky. I've had really good people supporting me and around me and mentoring me and I'm probably sensible enough to understand that I'm not good at many things, but I'm good at certain things. And get good people around you, it makes a swag of difference.
Brian, you are way too humble, and that definition of leadership you read, it just sums you up in a nutshell, because the true leader is the one, as you say, is not perceived as such, and people think that they've come up with their own ideas when actually you've provided the environment that allows them the confidence and the courage to do that. So, I think you've just described yourself perfectly there, mate. Now,
I tried to live to that one. That's been with me for 20 or 30 years, but it's a really good statement around, okay, you want people to go with you, well, that's the sort of way they can.
Yeah, no, it's brilliantly summed up. It's that humility thing again, which is a trait that I most admire, mate, and very seldom see in this day and age, unfortunately. Mate, switching to the literary side of things, what's the top book that you would recommend people read and why?
Oh, it's a book that not too many people would read, but I read it years ago and it really transformed my thinking about teams and leadership, and it was way back in my days of running Port Adelaide as a chief executive, and I read this book in the early days of that, and it really helped our club to be successful in our first 8 years. It's a book called Peak Performance, and it's a business lessons from the world's top sporting organisations. There are four researchers from the University of Waikato who wrote a book in, I think they wrote it in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was printed and reprinted and whatever. I use it a lot, and the reason it's so good is what it does, it links that whole thing about performance, and it talks about, are there things that enable organisations to maintain success? So how can an organisation continually win? So it goes back to he looks at the 10 top sporting teams in the world at that time in the 90s, 2000s. And, clubs like Bayern Munich, and it was the Australian cricket team at that time. It was the Hockey Roos and some great clubs, the All Blacks, etc. And sort of works out why these organisations, these great teams of the world, kept winning, because everyone can win once, but how do they sustain it over the course of the journey? And so this was a really, really neat book. And, you boil it all down, it all comes down to people. And so this whole elite theory of a peak performing organisation, which is the name of the book, it all comes down to people and the way they treat others, and it boils down to the simple things like having something to aim for, like they call it the greatest imaginable challenge. It comes down to the EQ piece, great leadership, high EQ, and understanding how to motivate people, which is really 3 simple things. Have a goal, have good leadership with high EQ, and then understand people. So, that was a great book for me.
There's some great life lessons in that. It's as applicable to any form of team, organisation, business, you name it. I haven't read that one, mate, so I'll put that on my list to have a look at over the Christmas break. Thanks, mate. Awesome. Completely switching gear here, because this is something that a lot of Australians talk about. They all pay too much tax. What's the top thing that you've legally done to minimise the tax that you pay, mate?
Now you're getting personal, aren't you? Okay. Look, there's no. I mean, I run a couple of businesses now, and I guess superannuation's been great because of the low tax environment. But I think setting up family trusts in my business has been a really useful way of making sure that you maximise your return on what you're making, basically.
Yeah, no, got great tips there. Mate, back in the investment arena then, what's both the worst and the best piece of investment advice that you've ever received?
Probably a lot of it's been good. I mean, you rely on other people to tell you. I can give you examples of, share portfolios that didn't go so well. We did not do well out of the 2000 and what was it? 2008.
2009, yeah.
GFC.
Yep.
GFC. That
not
was
lonely.
Really poor. Well, you could, we like all people, we leveraged a little bit, and that probably didn't result. But companies like Babcock and Brown that you invest in that go really well, and then they fall off. So maybe the worst investments are maybe some companies that I shouldn't have invested in at the that time that the GFC hit. But we all have those, and the best investment has been my investment in real estate.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, okay, interesting, mate. Mate, just to close off the ambush round then, what's a personal habit that you believe has contributed most to your success over your lifetime?
Personal habit? Don't know. This is an interesting one. Bushy, personal habit. Like I do lots of things. I think it's just it's that whole persistence piece. Like just keep having a crack. I'm coming to the end of my working career, so I'm getting to the stage where Annette wants me to travel with her, and I'm really keen to do that. We've travelled a lot in our lives, and we've spent a lot of money doing that, and it's been great, but we need to do more of it. So trying to ease out of my business a bit. So one of my personal habits that's got to change is the fact that I want to go to work every day and really work hard. So it's just like I get a great thrill out of working hard. That's a good personal habit, and it does do you very well. But I'm at the other end of it now, where I've got to ease back out of that a little bit and change my personal habit to be maybe savouring a bit more of life and what it has to do, and enjoying the success that we've had. I'm not a long way from the same challenge, and I guess the conclusion I've come to is that I won't stop. Rather than do it 5 days a week, I'll do it 2 days a week. And that's where I'm going.
Because I think once you remove that sort of passion and the purpose, I think the stats are, I think there's 3 out of 5 people are dead within 5 years of retirement, Brian, and I think most of that's because they don't have a reason anymore. Like you, my wife and I love to travel, and we do and have done and will continue to do a lot of that. But I don't think I'll be totally walking away from what we're doing, because I just get way too much satisfaction out of doing it. And I would say, having a look at your career, you'd be very much the same? Yeah,
look, I will be. I'll keep a number of boards over the next 12 months. I'll probably keep doing stuff that I do. I really enjoy the coaching. Who knows? But it's my next major challenge, mate, is to have that transition to doing a little bit more travel and a little bit less sitting here in my office.
Mate, just bring it to a very neat close then. If you were to speak to a school leaver, so someone who's just finished school, what would you advise them to invest their time, their money, their energy and their skills into create freedom for them long term?
Oh, look, I think I really love learning. That whole piece about lifelong learning is fantastic. So, you just finished school. Well, your journey in learning is just starting, because school equips you. School gives you a license to go into other places. But the rest of my life has been all about learning about new things, learning about finance, learning about sport administration, learning about government and how it works, learning about people and how they lead. And there's so much learning to be done. So to a young person leaving school, I'd just say, your learning journey is just beginning. So make sure that you maximise that, and don't jump into something that you're not going to learn anything from. So I always say that is probably my biggest lesson, is get around people and particularly people who you can learn from. Yeah,
no, great advice. Awesome advice. Mate, you've been very generous with your time today, mate, and as I say again, very humbled to have had an opportunity to have a deep dive into who is Brian Cunningham. Mate, if listeners want to get in touch with you from the coaching perspective or board involvements or other, how should they do that, mate?
Well, they can just have a look on the website. I've got there's a couple of websites. There's my Brian Cunningham and Associates website, and a company that I'm doing much more work in now is called ISC Consulting Group. And if they have a look at that in the website, they'll see the sorts of things that my business partner and I do in that space of coaching and psychometric assessment and leadership and a whole range of other consultancy services. So that's probably my major vehicle at the moment. But just if you Google Brian Cunningham and Associates, there's a contact in there that that they can follow through, and if they like Bushy, for sure.
Awesome, mate. Well, I know firsthand that the work that I did with you around the EQ or emotional intelligence front really did open my eyes to a much better self-awareness of who I am and how I operate, and as a great foundation then to be able to then look at others around me and then adopt a style and approach that is situational, that recognises the strengths, weaknesses and leanings of each and every one in that particular team. I've found that and have found that extremely beneficial to everything I've done since. So for those of you who are looking to achieve better results from either existing team or doing it, then there's no better person than yourself, Brian, to assist them down that road, mate. So look, really appreciate you spending the time. It's been a real pleasure and something I've been looking forward to a long time, mate. So thanks for saying yes, and look forward to continuing to following your journey ongoing, mate.
Thanks, Bushy. Good to speak with you, mate.
Thanks, mate. Cheers for now.
Well, freedom fighters, how good was that? To get a summary of all this investment gold in the show notes, just email me on hello@khgroup.com.au. That's hello@khgroup.com.au. Or check us out at www.bushymartin.com.au/getinvested. I look forward to joining you next week for another episode of the Get Invested podcast. So thanks for listening, and as always, dream as if you live forever and live as if you'll die